Hey guys, happy snow apocalypse day, whatever, 7? I don't know, I feel like this has been going on for a week now. So here's the open mic today. It might be just a touch longer because I actually want to share just a few comments to you about studies in religion and literature in our field. I think I meant to add this to one of the videos I sent out last night and I didn't, but it goes along with the question that I'm going to kind of pose. So just really briefly, Mark Knight has a great article, and I'll send this out. Some of you may know him. He's come to Baylor a few times. But it's basically a review article. It was published in 2016, so it's starting to get a little bit dated, but he reviews the previous 10 years of scholarship on religion and literature. And in that article, he discusses what's now kind of known as the religious turn. So in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it was really unpopular to talk about religion, or for that to be a subject of study in literary studies. Certainly you could do it from a historical perspective, but not as a lens for literary analysis. But then that changed kind of in the 2000s, I guess. And he kind of traces that history and that change, which is sort of interesting. But I'm just going to read to you one little paragraph from his article. And it reads, "The topic of religion was left on the sidelines. When it was taken up and discussed, it was often situated in a narrative about the loss of belief and the inevitable decline of an older sphere of thought in the modern world. Consider, for instance, the pointed title of J. Hillis Miller's influential study, The Disappearance of God, from 1963, or the regularity with which scholars in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s framed Victorian debates about religion in terms of faith and doubt. The faith and doubt paradigm positioned belief in the Christian religion as the losing side in a battle with modern skepticism, and the stories told were typically ones in which faith gave way to a doubt deemed more credible and more modern." I think the kiddos want to say a quick hello to you guys. I'm making a little video for my class. Yeah, so you can watch if you're quiet. And then the last sentence of that passage says, "Given how the paradigm made the story of faith's decline inevitable and predictable, it was unsurprising when few scholars writing in the 1980s and the 1990s showed much constructive interest in the subject of Victorian religion." Yeah, you can take some. So again, you're sort of hearing there some of the reasons why it became almost faux pas to study religion in relation to literature in any sort of serious way. But there's an interesting new field called post-secular studies, which really challenges the divide that got created out of this thinking between the secular, hey, that's distracting, baby, okay, between the secular and the religious. And post-secular studies sort of argues that secularism is an ideology just like religion can be, and it really works to legitimize the study of religion. One of the things that I appreciate about post-secular studies is it tries to move away from binaries, which has been a general move. I mean, feminism does the same thing, but I think, while we may have let go of some gender binaries, we've still really held to the sort of secular religious binary, and post-secularism wants to challenge that. So as we're thinking about Robert Elsmere, I think we are actually in danger of seeing this novel through a similar binary. And so what I want to do through my open mic today is to kind of challenge, or to work to challenge our own possible reading of it in those binary terms. And by that, I sort of mean we have a typical kind of loss of faith novel, which again, as I stressed in some of my other videos, I don't want us to characterize the whole Victorian period as a loss of faith period. Certainly it was happening, but it was also a period of great faith. And so in Robert Elsmere, we have, here I'm sort of thinking of those two characters, Catherine and Robert. So we're kind of tracking Robert's loss of faith story, and clearly he's meant to be the hero of the story. The novel was titled after him. He's an admirable character. And then we have Catherine, who is by no means the anti-hero, but she's certainly not presented in quite as positive terms in terms of her character traits. In fact, she's often presented as sort of rigid, and she really tries to hold on to her faith. And so I do think there's the danger of sort of seeing that as the binary, right? Robert loses his faith and Catherine holds on to it. So I'm wondering if there's ways where we can see Ward trying to actually present a more nuanced image of kind of people's different faith journeys. One way of thinking about this might be to think about people's different crisis moments, and I'm going to look at one here in just a minute with you. And sort of seeing when they reach kind of the pinnacle of their crisis, when we see that inner turmoil, what is it that they're struggling over, and is that different for the characters? Langham is another sort of interesting character just in terms of representing kind of the skeptic. So is he a type in the novel, or do we see ways that Ward is presenting him in a more nuanced way? When I was looking at some of the suggestions that you guys sent that you were interested in, one reason why this stood out to me is a lot of you were identifying sort of tensions or binaries in the text. So I'll just mention a few here, and there were certainly more. But Ryan talks about kind of the tension, or as he says, the fraught relationship between evangelicalism on the one hand and then beauty and art on the other. And we can kind of see this tension encapsulated, of course, in Catherine and Rose, how they often come head to head, and Rose is very much into her art and music. I'm just going down my list here. Olivia notices the juxtaposition between sort of scholarship and art, right? So again, I think art in some ways gets put into tension with a lot of different other factors in the novel. Madison also talks about the artificial boundary between religious thought and scholarly thought, which I thought was also another interesting binary, right? That's sometimes we might think of religious thought as scholarly, especially when we're thinking more in terms of theology. But it is interesting that we also see, especially maybe someone like Catherine's form of religion versus like the project that Robert is doing, or even if we think about the way that Robert divides his own days, where when he's working at Mural, and he spends time, during the day in those sort of pastoral services, and then in the evening he tries to do his scholarly work. And I'm sure Madison is also referring to just his decision at Oxford, where he felt like he had to either choose to be a scholar teacher or to be part of the church. And then I think there may have been one more binary. Maybe even just thinking too, Zoe had mentioned, and I was intrigued by this too, Mary Backhouse's story, and this whole idea of superstition and the ghost. So again, when things like that get slipped into the novel, is Ward in some ways trying to upset some binary by providing us with more than just two options, right? Because this is a problem when we are thinking in binaries, is we think it's either this or that, right? And so we kind of miss everything that's in between, or if we want to think more like a circle, we miss everything that's, the binary is inside the circle, and we miss everything that's outside of the circle. So I think what I'm asking you to do in this sort of very long open mic, obviously you can tell I've missed chatting with you guys, is to sort of locate in your mind and label what is a binary that the novel addresses or brings up or highlights. And then do you think that the novel, or actually let's phrase it like this, what are ways that you can detect in the novel that this binary gets undone a little bit, right? And that there are maybe third or fourth options listed. And again, you can cast this binary either in terms of issues, in terms of people and characters in the novel. It doesn't matter to me at all what binary that you choose to identify. Let your own interest in the novel drive that for you. So I'm just going to point out one crisis moment where I think the character is dwelling in these binaries. And this is going to be page 160. It's book 1, chapter 9. IX. And it's near the very end of the chapter. And this is after Catherine's mom has sort of pushed her to accept Robert and is trying to let Catherine know they don't necessarily need her. And this has been, of course, the driving force of Catherine's life. And so Catherine is feeling all awash about what has been her purpose, what is her purpose. And this is what the paragraph says. Catherine's night was a night of intense mental struggle. Her struggle was one with which the modern world has perhaps but scant sympathy. Instinctively, we feel such things out of place in our easy, indifferent generation. We think them more than half unreal. We are so apt to take it for granted that the world has outgrown the religious thirst for sanctification, for a perfect moral consistency, as it has outgrown so many of the older complications of the sentiment of honor. And meanwhile, half the tragedy of our time lies in this perpetual clashing of two estimates of life. The estimate which is the offspring of the scientific spirit, and which is forever making the visible world fairer and more desirable in mortal eyes, and the estimate of St. Augustine. And there's a footnote there that tells you that Augustine's distinction between the fallen and godly cities and the city of God, the former occupied by those incapable of seeing beyond worldly needs and desires, and the latter by those oriented toward the divine. So again, we're seeing this binary, of course, between sort of a spiritual life and a worldly life, right, which is one that I think we're often familiar with. And Catherine herself is caught in this binary, and lots of her agonizing over whether to become Robert's wife seems to do with, does she get to fulfill her own earthly desires, or does she keep on with her divine purpose? And she doesn't see that these can work together. So that's the open mic. Find a binary and puzzle over how the novel might be undoing it. And as always, if you can locate a specific passage that kind of illustrates the binary that you're interested in. And I'm looking forward to hearing it.